we can translate an IPv6 address to an IPv4 address using NAT64. And NAT64 comes in two different flavors. It comes in a stateless flavor, and it comes in a stateful flavor. Let's examine the difference between the two here. When we're talking about a stateless NAT64 deployment, what we're doing is we are creating a network address translation that will not require any binding information to be maintained, no session state information to be maintained. So it's going to be lightweight in its deployment. However, it requires what are known as IPv4 translatable IPv6 addresses. Now, what are those? Well, there's a well-known IPv4 translatable IPv6 address. And how does that work? Well, let me show you. Here is the well-known address. 64 colon double F 9B double colon slash 64. 96, not 64, whoa, 96. If you analyze the slash 96, how many bits are left over? How many bits are left over? Well, 128 minus 96 is 32. So 32 bits left over. What other type of address is 32 bits long? An IPv4 address. So let's say your IPv4 address was this. Here's your IPv4 address. 192.0.2.33. Those 32 bits could fit into that slash 96 portion of this address. And as a result, you now have an IPv4 translatable IPv6 address. So what would it look like? It'd look like this. There it is. Oh, that's not it. It would look like this. Let me get the right one for you, folks. Copied and pasted the wrong one. There we go. That's the address right there. So 64 colon FF 9B double colon 192.0.2.33. Now you can also use regular global IPv6 addresses for this. So for example, if you're using 2001 colon DB8 colon A, et cetera, for your environment, you could still utilize that particular addressing, but utilize an IPv4 address in the lower bits. So from slash 96 to slash 128. So you don't have to use this well-known IPv4 translatable IPv6 address. But what do we have to understand about this? We have to understand that this is a one-to-one translation. What do we mean by one-to-one translation? Well, for every global or for every IPv6 assigned device in your network, they will need their own unique IPv4 global address if you expect to get out on the internet. So we're not conserving any IPv4 addresses here. So if you have 250 users in your network, which is a small number for most networks, they will need each their own public IPv4 address. And that's going to be tough to come by. It's going to be tough to come by. But you do preserve end-to-end reachability here at the network layer. Why? Because there's no state session or session state information that has to be changed whatsoever. Everything's maintained from end to end. You just have this simple translation happening on the router. The router looks at this particular IPv6 address and says, all right, that is an IPv4 translatable IPv6 address. So now when I send the packet out this interface, the source is going to be 192.0.2.33 instead of 64 colon FF 9B double colon 192.0.2.33. So it's just making that quick translation, doesn't have to change anything. However, you're not conserving IPv4 addresses here. It's a one-to-one translation. We have the ability to implement stateful NAT64, and this is very similar to port address translation for IPv4. So you're going to be creating or modifying these bindings, maintaining session state information on the router. So it's more resource intensive than stateless NAT64. But you have the 1 to any number of translations when it comes to IPv6 to IPv4. So you have your IPv6 addressing on your devices, and then you're going to have those addresses translated on the router. Translated to what? To the IPv4 addresses or address that is going to be utilized for those translations. So if your outside IP address is 192.0.3.2 and you're translating to the IP address on that outside interface, then that's what it's going to be translated to, from the IPv6 address to the IPv4 address. Or maybe you have a pool set up of public IPv4 addresses like we do with NAT right now for IPv4. Well, then you have that pool that's going to be utilized for the translations instead. But just like NAT for IPv4, we're not preserving end-to-end reachability at the network layer because that translation's happening, which is modifying session state information, especially when we are conserving these IPv4 addresses using what? Port numbers, right? We have those port numbers that are being utilized with the session state information. We are translating the IP address, so nothing's being maintained end-to-end as it needs to be. But we have these two options, stateless and stateful, for NAT64.